Ever get stuck on one of those childhood questions, kind of just kind of sticks with you?
Yeah, for sure.
I was thinking about this. When I was a kid, the movie, The Ten Commandments, absolutely fascinated me, right? But I could never quite wrap my head around why the Egyptians, after seeing God part the Red Sea, wouldn't just like immediately believe.
Right.
This whole thing about faith and evidence always kind of bugged me. And it turns out that same kind of questioning spirit totally animated the early life of today's subject, Jacque Fresco. So buckle up, because in this deep dive, we are going way back to explore Fresco's early years, specifically his evolving relationship with religion, and how those experiences, especially that early skepticism, really laid the groundwork for his groundbreaking work as a futurist.
Sounds fascinating. Ready to dive in.
So Fresco wasn't raised in like an explicitly atheist household or anything, but even as a young kid, certain religious ideas just didn't quite compute for him. Like that Ten Commandments thing I mentioned, that question about the Egyptians, that was pure young Fresco.
Yeah, it's interesting, right? Because it speaks to this really fundamental human drive, this natural curiosity, this need to make sense of the world around us. And especially with kids, they haven't yet learned to accept the standard answers. They're still figuring out how to reconcile what they're told with what they observe.
Exactly. And for Fresco, that drive to reconcile belief with tangible evidence only intensified as he got older. He was always asking those why questions. And then, boom, his brother introduces him to Darwin's theory of evolution. And for Fresco, it was like a light bulb moment. Here was this elegant, evidence-based framework for understanding the origins of humanity, one that really resonated with his analytical mind.
And it's important to underline here, it wasn't just about substituting one belief system for another, right? With evolution, Fresco saw a system rooted in observation, in data. It wasn't about blind faith. It was about aligning your understanding with demonstrable reality.
Totally. And this pragmatic, almost forensic approach really comes through in how he tackled some of the biblical stories he'd grown up with. Like there's this great anecdote in the article about how he would just pick apart these narratives. I mean, he was really applying logic to these ancient stories.
Like what kind of narratives?
Well, for one, he was completely perplexed by the whole snake being cursed to crawl thing. Like, how does that even work, biologically speaking?
Right.
Or the idea of horses being punished by having to sleep standing up. It's like he couldn't help but test these stories against his own growing understanding of the natural world. And often they just didn't add up.
Which makes sense, given his personality. He was always more interested in practical solutions and understanding the mechanics of how things worked. And that kind of thinking, it doesn't really lend itself to accepting things on faith alone.
Absolutely. And what I find really interesting is how that need to understand, even when it came to belief systems he disagreed with, led him down some pretty unconventional paths. Like, get this. Fresco actually spent time attending satanic church services.
Whoa, hold on. Now, it's crucial to point out here that he wasn't like converting to Satanism or anything. This wasn't some dramatic crisis of faith.
Right.
Fresco was all about understanding the why behind human behavior, even behavior that seemed completely at odds with his own worldview. He wanted to get inside the minds of people who subscribe to these, let's say, alternative belief systems to understand their motivations, their logic.
Exactly. He was all about peeling back the layers of human behavior. And perhaps the most telling example of this, the one that really stuck with me, was his observation about funerals.
Okay, what about funerals?
Well, the article mentions how he always found it deeply ironic that people who believed in an afterlife and this idea of being reunited with their loved ones in paradise would still grieve so intensely at a funeral.
Oh, wow.
Like, shouldn't they be, I don't know, celebrating?
Right.
And I think that observation, as simple as it seems, speaks volumes about how Fresco viewed the world. He was fascinated by the contradictions, the gaps between what we say we believe and how we actually behave.
It's so true. And honestly, that fascination, that drive to reconcile those contradictions, it's woven throughout his entire body of work.
Absolutely. It's there in his ideas about social engineering and his vision of designing a future that took into account the complexities of human nature, not just our ideals. It all circles back to those early explorations, to that relentless questioning spirit that started way back in childhood.
Definitely. His journey is a powerful reminder that questioning, even, or maybe especially, the things that make us uncomfortable can lead to some of the most profound insights.
Totally. And it leaves us with a lot to ponder, right?
Yeah.
I mean, if we were designing a society from scratch, a society that prioritized reason and evidence like Fresco envisioned, what role would religion or spirituality even play?
That's a really good question.
It's something to think about, for sure. And on that note, we're going to wrap up this deep dive into the fascinating world of Jacque Fresco.
Fascinating is an understatement.